This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Welcome once again, folks, to Core Brain Journal. This is Dr. Charles Parker, and we're very pleased again to have yet another interesting person. And tonight we're going to be talking about is a dimension that many of us are completely unfamiliar with. Some of us are peripherally somewhat familiar with it, but we're going to be talking about the practice of Ayurvedic medicine and health and mind science in that direction. And our guest tonight is a master, and she is Shunya Acharya. And Shunya, thank you so much for coming on board. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Charles.
So I'm going to do a brief intro, folks, and then we're going to talk about we're going to develop a different language that really, in certain senses, on a deeper level, is really a similar language for all of us. So I'm looking forward to this. So Acharya lives in Emeryville, California, and is one of the extraordinary teachers of the living, embodied wisdom of Ayurveda. Shunya is the descendant of a long line of Ayurvedic sacred teachers and masters going back, get this, centuries. She is the founder of the Vedika global and spiritual foundation dedicated to elevating consciousness, building community, and serving humanity by illuminating India's Vedic spiritual traditions of Ayurveda, yoga, and Vedanta. I'm not familiar how to pronounce that one. So she was named among the 100, I'm assuming, top Ayurveda masters and yoga trailblazers by Spirituality and Health magazine. Now, there were a lot of words in there that I may have messed up. I may have even messed up the specifics of your specific title. Please tell us a little more about yourself and clarify anything that I didn't say accurately.
I think that was a great introduction, and so happy to tell you that you did not mess up.
Okay.
And it's just wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, that Acharya is my, as I was mentioning to you earlier, that Acharya is my title, which means a master teacher, and a master teacher graduates from, at least a decade long, and in my case, it was 14 years of rigorous education in a very traditional setting where we connect with the original classical text and an ancient language, Sanskrit, that goes back 10,000 years. And I did all of this in the early 1960s. So, India was not that traditional either. It was changing. Everything was changing. And so I'm a woman in both worlds, Charles. Mm-hmm. And then because I'm carrying this mantle forward of indeed a very ancient lineage or legacy forward, and I found myself by destiny, or what we Indians like to say, karma, here in the United States for the last 3 decades now. I have been spreading this work, and I've found that there is such a hunger for what I bring forward not only with Ayurveda, which is like the ancient system of health and healing from India, but also its sister science, yoga, and then Vedanta, which you pronounce perfectly, which really is just what we're all talking about now, the one self, the unity consciousness, and how really there are different faces of the same core consciousness. So that's Vedanta, and it began thousands of years ago, and we can actually find written texts from thousands of years ago, carefully passed on from family to family, until now you can find them on like Amazon or any other search engine. So we've been teaching that mainly as service to our community. So then when I came to California, more than 2 decades ago, I established a not-for-profit Vedika Global, and it's just been growing since then. And, we train future practitioners and ambassadors of these sciences, and students are worldwide. I mean, it's reaching, I don't know how many people in how many countries. And and here I am now talking to you.
Well, I appreciate it so much. Now, Two questions immediately come to mind, and I'm sure others are thinking the same thing. The first thing is I really do have a curiosity and would love to hear about your learning teaching process over there, those many years of learning the tradition. That would be one thing. And the second thing, if you could amplify on what you actually teach your practitioners to in fact do. Are they a meditative practice? Do they actually practice yoga as a form of meditation? Is it a form of self-realization in terms of transcendence? What's actually, first of all, back to the original question, what was your training like? What actually happened to you when you were younger like that?
I'm so excited you would ask me that question. For a while there, I fancied that I want to tell the whole world about it, and my whole life is about this education. And I do, but probably I focus more on its applied part than just the education. But so this education system is called Gurukul method of education, and there's a famous word in it called guru, which we know is a great master or mentor, and which has good or positive or negative connotations depending on how we take it. And kulam means the family. So what happened was these are family style schools that were prevalent in India for all its existence until about, let's say, 250 years ago, when the British made attempts to colonize India. That was a death knell to these schools. And even prior to that, they were falling apart as more of the Hindu kings were losing their seat of power. So they used to get patronage from the kings, and the schooling was where the parents would, a 9 or 10-year-old would enter the school and graduate as a young man or woman. It was open to both sexes, and the education was an immersion experience. It was hands-on, and it was also based on study of grammar and arithmetic and human psychology and ethics or dharma, which is from the Veda. And also then whatever was the domain science, like whether it's medicine, whether it's metallurgy, whether it's architecture, whether it's, how to be a soldier. So there were schools for all these different vocations, but not just that. But the ethics or dharma would be very important, and meditation would be very important to touch a higher consciousness and purify the mind and connect with the knowledge in a deeper way. Community service would be very important. So these schools they're almost a rarity now. And my school, or my family school in a tiny town in northern India, was one of the last grassroots education school. And my focus then was on learning the greater spiritual consciousness elevating knowledge and dharma or ethics, universal ethics. But also we focused upon basically two goals, and one was awakening health and the other was awakening consciousness. And we don't really see a difference, because abiding health of the body and the mind can be achieved only when we connect, according to the Indian system of thought, with a deeper consciousness of the self. And this self is not religious. The self is not only the self of Indians, but it's the self that it's universal. It lives through all beings and expresses itself as the inherent intelligent awareness and infinite potential. So to cut a long story short, I would say that my education brought out the best in me, physically, sensorially, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and shaped me to be a leader. And I came out with a lot of skills, the skills of using yoga, meditation, and the physical postures and the breathing to really really hone my skills, my mind, and my vitality. The system of Ayurveda and its lifestyle teachings to be the best I can be and really be healthy. And the last 10 years I've been teaching at my school, I've not had one day off for sickness, God bless.
That's good. You're a healthy woman. It's working for you.
Exactly. I have a genetic condition that puts people in wheelchairs, and I couldn't walk when I was young for a few days there. Now I run, and I'm going to be 50 next year. So, and then the spiritual aspect makes me feel like, when I came to America, I didn't feel like I've come to America, to a foreign land. I just felt like I connect with everything, with the birds, with the animals, with brown people, black people, white people. It's just all one. So this knowledge was the knowledge of life, along with domain knowledge of being able to be a practitioner or a healer or a speaker. That's logistics. That's what, now to personality. But inwardly, I feel like it taught me how to self-actualize myself, know myself, and then be really clear on the goal of self-realization. It doesn't graduate self-realized beings, but it definitely teaches us that know yourself and know the big self with the S, and recognize it in all beings and creatures, and take care of the environment, by the way, and the planet, and you're good to go. And that's the kind of school I opened here in Emeryville, California, which is next to Berkeley. And we've been there for 10 years now, and so I have all kinds of courses from people who are coming in for self-care because they've been disappointed by another system, or they've heard about Ayurveda and yoga, and they've heard about some of the amazing things these ancient traditions have for the modern life. And then we had a group of people. It always happens, they go forward and then they study deeper and deeper, and then they have themselves in their own right become teachers and leaders. In fact, I have students who took Ayurveda to Stanford University. We are now teaching our third course there at their health improvement program. We went for one pilot and they want us back. Similarly, another graduate of mine went to on the California prisons. And now she and her team have become certified to teach in all California prisons the same science that I learned at the feet of my teacher, with other students, like living in a family. So I guess
that is so interesting. Let me tell you, as you're speaking, I have to tell you, my father, many, many years ago, he flew. He was a flight instructor with AT-6s and T-33 jets during the Korean War in the Air Force. He was a pilot and flew fighter aircraft, and then became a salesman. But one of the things, he always listened to Earl Nightingale records. And I was in his bookshelf one night, and as a kid, probably it was before I was in the 5th grade, and I discovered this book by Paramahansa Yogananda. And at that time, the words and the name, the whole thing was just way over my head. I mean, it's just so completely unfamiliar. Now, I'm sure you know the name of the book, but I was trying to recall it, because then later on I read it thoroughly and was very interested in it. What do you recall the name of the book?
Yeah, it's Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yeah, that's it, right, basic. So, yeah, I read that during my freshman year in medical school. So, that was a very interesting transformational book, because in it, of course, he talks a great deal about the practice. And what I'm assuming, which we haven't quite covered, is that in your training you have a certain measure of practice, I'm assuming, please clarify it for me, regarding meditation or yoga as part of self-realization. Is that true?
Absolutely, because we believe that yoga is a necessary step which helps our mind. We become masters of our own mind. We get to understand how to control this amazing, intelligent instrument that we have, and that's a necessary step.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So then, you not only teach the practice of self-realization through various principles of yoga, but also how to live a balanced life in a practical world, so that spiritual synchrony helps the development of the person in the context of their society and their relationships.
Yeah, because it felt like having several doors to what wisdom I wanted to impart was necessary. And some people come in through the health and wellness door, and they want, simply to deal with their elevated cholesterol. So we teach them, some recipes and some foods, and I've written a book about it so that it can support them in all naturally, just through their change in their food and their seasonal regimen. their body comes into balance. And then many of them start getting curious because they also know that we are offering yoga for the mind and for a deeper balance. And then finally, Vedanta, or the deeper spirituality at the causal level, where one actually goes beyond even wanting to fix things and in fact manifest it from within. And amazing changes I'm noticing at the physical, at the psychological, and the spiritual level. And yet it's all documented. There's nothing like willy-nilly, or I'm not making it up. It's like, these are called sciences in the Indian traditions, like the science of the self. It's very documented and structured, and there's like very clear steps from a mind that's caught up in the world to a mind that goes inward and becomes more mindful, and then a mind that becomes universal and expansive. So there are these gradations that happen.
Well, one of the things I liked about the book, and it's coming to my mind, I haven't reread it for years, is the relative skepticism that Paramahansa had as he was coming along, because he himself wondered about all this and said, I don't really know if all this makes any sense. And I'm obviously simplifying it. But then as he got further into it, he shared, that's what the autobiography was how he evolved as a person in the course of his practice. And I thought it was a very interesting book. And I'm sure that's the kind of thing you inspire and encourage with the group that's with you.
Well, skepticism is like, I encourage skepticism because blind believers don't go far. And I think even I was a bit of a skeptic, honestly, but I was witness to how pain and inflammation took over my body, and of course distress and suffering in my mind consequently in my late teens. Much later, I found out, Dr. Charles, that I was suffering from an immunological condition, and a modern process or technology could then diagnose many decades later that I have a genetic situation here, and and a lot of people with my situation might end up having multiple surgeries or painkiller dependency or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I used Ayurveda and some of its practices, such as oiling the body, taking turmeric, which is an anti-inflammatory, and these things. And I am painkiller free, and I'm going to be 50 next month, and I am not only walking, I'm running. And then the distress and the darkness that had descended within me, and the lack of self-worth, every time I, practice some yoga or meditate, I don't know, I seem to have come through. Mm-hmm. And that skepticism then converted into a fierce conviction. Mm-hmm. And that's what made me a leader, both not only at my school, but California-wide. There's an association of Ayurvedic medicine. I lead that for the last 4 years. And I'm also leading the education efforts of a 60-country consortium. I mean, these are people, professors, teachers, doctors, integrative medicine, functional medicine doctors who are participating in that consortium. So there were a lot of skeptics who are turning around and looking at this ancient knowledge and finding some, teachings for our modern lives, it looks like,
So how, we talked a little bit about this before we started the recording, and I am curious about making this next connection for myself and for our audience. We were talking a bit about the Ayurvedic practice in sense of self-management in the world. And then we were also talking about the relevance and the absolute importance of its ability to influence the evolution of the mind and probably the brain by default, if we're going to think about it biologically, but of the mind. So could you take that practice and help us coalesce it with mind science as much as possible?
I'd like to do that because, I am so amazed because I was telling somebody that though I come from this ancient family and a tiny town in India, I am a woman of both worlds. And I've had all kinds of education, modern and traditional. And I've also studied a lot around mind because it fascinates me. And what really humbles me when I look at Ayurveda, which is like conventionally speaking, 5 to 7,000 year old living tradition. It's a living tradition. There are hospitals of Ayurveda in India and Nepal and Sri Lanka and some of these countries surrounding India from ancient times, and it's taught in universities and people do PhDs in it. So it never died out. It never had to be saved. It's just continuing, and now it's worldwide. And Ayurveda from the beginning declared that life itself is a tripod of body, mind, and consciousness, and never separate. And the human subject is, we should be careful to never consider, never compartmentalize the living subject as body only, or or mind only, or spirit only, which then makes it religious. But it wasn't. It was not trying to be religious. It said that in fact there are 4 dimensions to the human being: body, mind, consciousness, and finally they also said senses. And I didn't understand it in the beginning when I was young, but now I understand when I see people addicted to technology or social media or their laptops, and what effect that has on their brain, on their intelligence, and even on their moods, and even on their gut. They feel nauseated after a while. So even how we use, abuse, underuse our senses impacts our well-being for sure. So just to to give a very specific example, is the dog bothering our recording quality?
I can hear it, but if you could, I don't know if we can hear it pretty well, and I don't know if you can go and do something with the dog, because we can just stay here and wait.
Yeah, I can move away even further, and that would help. Hold on one.
Yeah. I mean, I can hear you very well, but the dog is a little bit of a distraction in the background.
Yeah, he's in another room, but I think this is improved now. Can you hear me well now?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Wonderful.
And that is better.
So I guess you can just edit that part out, right?
No, we're going to listen to it, because that was such an important point that you were making there. I really hadn't thought about, I've heard about the three pegs on the stool, but I hadn't really thought about the 4th one, the senses that you just brought together. And
we use it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the relevance of the balance there and separating them as specific understandable points in the ways that they work together would be very interesting.
And and then if you think about it, Charles, if we're looking at the quality of our mind and what kind of thoughts we're having, and other thoughts going to lead us down a slippery slope of depression, low self-worth, and, down the road even suicide or crime, it ultimately begins with the senses, the 5 senses. What are we looking at? Like what kind of, what are we entertaining ourselves with? Criminal stuff? Or we're all talking about it now, the senses. What are we eating? Are we addicted to alcohol? Or are we, eating and drinking, foods that are really healthy and they somehow turn around and, improve all the happy chemicals like serotonin in our brain? Mm-hmm. But the doorways of the mind are the senses. And so Ayurveda prescribes this elaborate regimen of how to contact the senses with worldly engagement, but in a healthy way. And it doesn't teach any of that. It's not trying to make us into monks or, not indulge in, sexual pleasure or none of that preachy stuff. It says you're here, you're now, you're an earthly being, and all of this world is for your enjoyment, but in balance. And here are the symptoms of overuse. Here are the symptoms of underuse. And here are the symptoms of abuse of your senses. And then it prescribes this beautiful regimen of how to rest our senses. So in my book, for example, I have a whole chapter on what are the beautiful things we can do for our eyes, what are the things we can do for our mouth, what are the things we can do for our ears, and they actually impact the state of our mind. So it's very interesting how it intermixes the gross and the subtle dimensions of matter and, creates better engagement for us as a living being with these senses.
Well, let's take a moment, because in our introduction, I didn't really address your book, and I didn't address the download that's going to be available for our listeners as a PDF in the show notes. But your book is I'm asking because I looked in your material here and really didn't see it, but is your book Feeding Our Three Pillars of Life with Ayurvedic Practices? Is that the title of your book?
That's the title of the PDF that we will be sharing, but I'm happy to share the title of my book if you want.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The title of the book is Ayurveda, just as we heard it, Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, and it's available everywhere right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, because as soon as you started talking about these different dimensions, I was wondering if they were in your book, and then it occurred to me we hadn't really talked about your book. And so let's take a moment, since we went down that path, we segued a little bit into your book. Let's talk about the contents of your book and what was the purpose of writing it in the first place.
So what I found fascinating about Ayurveda and the ancient, wisdom of India was that they focus not just on disease, which we can find if we want to battle with a disease, and there is also disease prevention that we're all feeling so good about. But there is this hidden paradigm about feeding the body and the mind with such wonderful food, as well as ideas, as well as practices of breathing, and get ready for this word, and it awakens health. So according to the Vedas, or the most ancient tradition coming from India, health is our birthright, and even though we decay and we age, we can do that with dignity. We don't have to do it with any of the attending drama of disease and distress and, some of the end of life scenarios that we've all become used to. Like we've all been used to saying to each other, of course, that's what happens as you age. Of course, yeah, that's right. And it's like we're just thinking that this is it, it's just going to be all downhill, and it's going to be tragic, and it's going to be miserable. But these ancient sages who gave us yoga, who taught us meditation, they were like the world guru in teaching meditation, yoga, Ayurveda. They were leading really long lives, and they were doing it in a way where they were constantly connecting with, health. They kept recreating it in their being by leading a 24-hour day in such a way that's its medicine unto itself. So what they would do is they would focus on the 24-hour biocircadian or chronobiological rhythm that's created because of the earth orbiting around the sun. And, changes in the light, changes in the sun. Now we all know how much it affects our, brain chemicals, serotonin, melatonin. They're completely dependent upon light and dark exposure. And even our gut and our physiology, everything, right down to every cell of ours, corresponds to the movement of the sun around in the sky as we orbit on our axis on Earth. But we've created our own schedules, and we have the electricity, and we have our own virtual world to live in, so we don't pay attention. But plants do, animals do, so they know when to eat, when to eliminate, or when to nest, but we've forgotten. Similarly, there is a 12-month cycle of seasons that's created by the earth orbiting around the sun. Now, this too is not just for pleasure. It's not a pleasure trip we're taking around the sun of a whole year, 365 days. This is like huge impact on our physiology and on our psychology. And if we don't pay attention to the cues, the human disease of alienation from nature, and then distress and disease as symptoms to return to it. So this is what the sages guided us. And, I didn't find any single book, and this is almost a 400-page book, but we're broken up into easy parts to look into. It's not one long, tale. But I didn't find any book because some of this knowledge was spread out in various ancient, texts, and it had to be strung together. And the lifestyle version I found out there on social media is a very do it yourself, kind of dumbed down version of it. So I wanted to create something that was authentic, that was connected to the great classical literature, which I have given reference to. It can be considered a scholarly book, but it is also being applauded and heralded as like a much needed book that's universal, because they didn't teach it for one kind of people who look like them or pray like them. In fact, Ayurveda was created even for farm animals and for trees and plants, with and then for humanity. So I wanted to bring this book out, and it's interwoven with health for the body, the senses, the mind, and spirit, because you just can't only address the body. So that's what the book is about. I'm just happy to share with all our listeners that within its first 2 weeks, it did hit the bestseller.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah, as you were talking about this, I was recalling a book, and I don't have the title firmly in mind, but you would be interested because of the discussion we're sharing right now. But Dr. Sidney Baker wrote a very interesting book directed to autism spectrum disorder children, and it has to do with circadian rhythms. And that book really talked about the relevance of sleep, rest, following the sun, and not getting out of synchrony with those diurnal rhythms. It was quite interesting, and it came to mind as you were talking about it.
And this is really validating to hear. And I have quoted some more research too, which is, more in the last 20 years that we've come across. And what I'm quoting is references from books from 7,000 years ago. So it kind of, this modern leading edge science and research is then, and the ancient knowledge comes together in a beautiful bouquet for the awake human being to say, you know what, enough. I'm going to stop making feeling healthy and getting healthy such a rocket science, or so expensive, or so unaffordable. And I'm going to use simple things, like I've mentioned, things we can grow in our gardens here in America, or buy in a natural food store, or even a regular grocery store, and use that and maybe add to my cuisine, no matter which country I'm from. And not change, anything. You don't even have to be vegetarian to follow Ayurveda. Mm-hmm. You can eat whatever. You could eat Eskimo diet, but you could still follow some Ayurveda principles and be better for it and have a happier mind. So, I've quoted case studies throughout. May I share one of them, which I feel is relevant?
Please.
So there's this 22-year-old girl. In fact, chapter 1 begins with her story, this beautiful 22-year-old girl Brittany Barrett, who found me, giving a lecture in Bay Area, one of those bookstores. And she was crying throughout, Charles. And later she came up to me and said, my body is broken, my mind is broken, but I heard your message that nothing is broken. It's only out of balance. Bring it back to balance. So I'm going to follow you. And she kind of followed me to a retreat and then to my school. But to cut a long story short, when I met her at the retreat, I didn't know she'll be my student, and I felt bad for her. So I just wrote down 5 things for her to do, and she did that. And one of them included a 15-minute meditation, putting fresh flowers. The second one was putting fresh flowers in her room every day. The third was to eat a certain recipe made with yogurt and water in a certain ratio, a smoothie with cumin and turmeric added to it. Some 5 basic things that one could do in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, apart from the meditation. And she told us that how in a few weeks, from 22 bowel movements, because she was suffering from ulcerative colitis, she had bleeding stools. From 22 bowel movements a day, or having to stick near a bathroom, it came down to 8. And she had been on 18 prescription pills, and including antidepressants since age 16. She was only 22. Within a year of just doing these 5 simple things and waking up at a certain time, like the other doctor said, sleeping at a certain time, that I just gave her a small map. Didn't even spend a lot of time with her. She just started following that. Within a year, she got off of everything, especially the antidepressant. And now she not only has a healthy mind, but she's leading others, and she's planning a television show on, medicinal food and spices and
That's
all.
exciting. Congratulations.
So these are some stories of like maybe disease and distress of the mind is just symptomatic of us walking away from nature to such an extent that it's begun to like punish us. It's just a thought.
Mm-hmm. It's like when I was younger, we had dogs in the backyard. I was a hunter as a kid. We hunted rabbits. So we had two beagles. And the beagles were on we didn't have them in a fenced yard. We had them on a chain. The chain was long. And what would happen is they'd sometimes get so excited they run to the end of the chain, and their body, of course, would fling out and they'd land on their back because they were pulled up short by their collar on the wire. And it sounds terrible, and really it wasn't good. They didn't do that often, and we didn't take any joy in the situation. But really, that's kind of what you're talking about. If you get far enough away, the pain becomes more amplified and realized and real. And then what happens is you lose that synchrony, and as a result, that lack of balance can have implications on many levels, including your mind. Sounds that way.
I think it was symptomatic of what you were saying, right? Something dropped in my background.
There's that distant magic. It was so profound. No, but I think I really appreciate that point, because that is so much of what we see in recovery without it being articulated so effectively as you just did. I think what people look for when they're seeking recovery is some form of balance. I mean, we make a lot of progress without knowing the intricacies of your work, just by having people exercise and eat in a healthy way. And that's a step in the right direction. Yours is obviously more comprehensive. And let me ask you, while I think about it, what's your recommendation in general about maintenance with meditation? Are you of the school that would say meditate every day for a period of time? Or what's your thought about that whole meditative experience?
I think we begin with meditation every day, but if it becomes too mechanical, then the human mind wants to run from it. Mm-hmm. But if we surround it, if we contextualize it with, you're meditating on a greater truth, which is your own self. You're making an appointment to meet yourself. And just conversations like you're having with me, and I bet you're having with other people. The knowledge helps, I think, more than even meditation. And then meditation becomes a way to access that knowledge from inside and outside. So I feel like these conversations and ancient traditions, and even modern teachers and their modern understandings, it feels like new and old, we're all coming together as humanity to the same point of we need to have our act together. And once this knowledge gives us a context, then what else can people like you and me do but meditate and go inside and kind of regroup ourselves and not follow the herd behavior of everybody running after the same thing, and outsourcing our inner knowingness and really making our health such a tragic conversation and creating our own inner path to well-being. So meditation then becomes almost like it's like an expression of our health, even more than a path to reach health. So I feel like knowledge plus meditation, or higher knowledge, or those soulful, healing, natureful, spirit-blessed conversations are very important for us. And so I feel like a community of people is also important along with meditation.
I mean, that's so true. We see that all the time. People who are on the path. I mean, it's been a real pleasure for me speaking to people like yourself, because it's an opportunity for me to have a meditative moment with someone who is bringing in knowledge from a different perspective that really is more comprehensive in a way, or certainly more integrative in the sense of pulling material together so that all of us can grow from the experience of learning that additional perspective and synchronizing with it.
Yeah, I mean, because I've seen people who've, who go to meditation classes like they'd go to their gym or they'd go to like a salad bar. It's like one more thing to do. And then I'm not so sure. But then there are those people who are trying to inform themselves. And as you so humbly put it, I get to learn, even though, you're a learned being and a wise being, but you're always open. And I feel the same. I feel like I'm a lifelong student. For us, meditation is just like cherry on the cake. I feel that,
That is very interesting. I'm enjoying this conversation so much, and I just happened to look up and see what the time is. So I wanted to make sure that we did pull together one other dimension that's so important, and that would be how people can connect with you and your mission. And we'll have something in the show notes, but if you could share that with our listeners, it might take them over to get further into the show notes for the links that you've shared with me that I'll have there.
Yeah, so I can be reached on my website, which is my name, which you can read in the show notes, Acharya Shunya, just put it together, .com, ACHARYA Shunya.com. And if you want to study with me or come on over and benefit from some of our wellness teachings and activities, or just our community that's forming for more of such inspired dialogues, then you can come to Vedika Global, VEDIKA Global, as the word global.org. And, I'll see you there.
Well, I'm just actually taking a quick minute to put that additional point on there. Yeah, that's terrific. I hope that your efforts are really met with I'm hesitating to say this because it's just really, I wanted to say how much I appreciate working with you and do everything you can to support what you're talking about, because your vision of where you're going is all about the kind of recovery that so many seek and yet don't have a method, a way to go at it. I mean, this is not psychoanalysis. This isn't psychopharmacology medication. This is a whole different way of living and coming together with a larger, transcendent contribution to not only the evolution of each individual, but the individual's contribution to the group, as you were saying just a moment ago. So,
thank you, Charles. Coming from you, I feel very empowered to hear that. And, there's a lot of welcome. We're all getting ready, I think, for transcendent conversations and look for something bigger and more abiding and more ecological.
So very true. So very true. So thank you very much, Shunya. Really appreciate you coming on board.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.